The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick cream paper that felt expensive between my fingers. I should have known right then that trouble was coming. Nothing good ever came in fancy stationery, especially when it bore the letterhead of Morrison, Kline Associates, the most ruthless divorce attorneys in the state. My name is Jake Thompson, and I'm a certified public accountant. Not the most exciting profession, but it pays the bills and keeps food on the table. Or at least it used to, before everything went sideways. I've been married to Lisa for 8 years, and until 3 months ago, I thought we had a decent life together. Sure, we had our problems. What couple doesn't? But I never imagined it would come to this. The letter was brief and to the point. Lisa wanted a divorce, and she wanted half of everything I'd worked for. The house, the business, my retirement accounts, even the classic Mustang I'd been restoring in the garage for the past 5 years. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the restraining order attached to the back of the divorce papers, claiming I'd been emotionally abusive and threatening. I sat in my kitchen, staring at those papers, feeling like I'd been sucker punched. Emotionally abusive? The woman who screamed at me for leaving dishes in the sink was calling me abusive? The same woman who threw a coffee mug at my head last Christmas because I forgot to pick up her dry cleaning? My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone who could make sense of this mess. But who? Lisa had systematically driven away most of my friends over the years. She always had some complaint about them. Tom was too crude, Mike drank too much, Jennifer was a bad influence. One by one, they'd stopped coming around, stopped calling. I'd let it happen because it was easier than fighting about it. The phone rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered. Thompson Accounting, this is Janet. Janet, it's Jake. I won't be coming in today. Something's come up. Everything all right, boss? You sound terrible. Janet had been my secretary for 6 years. She was sharp, efficient, and had a motherly way about her that made clients feel comfortable. More importantly, she was one of the few people who'd seen through Lisa's act from the beginning. Lisa filed for divorce, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, Jake. I know this isn't what you wanted. She's claiming I was abusive. There's a restraining order. I can't even go home. That's ridiculous. Anyone who knows you would laugh at that accusation. You're the most patient man I've ever met. Try telling that to a judge. Her lawyer is Richard Morrison. You know what that means. Janet whistled low. That's going to be expensive. It gets worse. She wants half the business. Another pause. Jake, you need to get yourself a lawyer. A good one. Don't try to handle this alone. I hung up and stared at the papers again. The restraining order was temporary, but it effectively locked me out of my own house. I was sitting in my office at 7 in the morning because I had nowhere else to go. I'd spent the night in a motel room that smelled like stale cigarettes and broken dreams. The irony wasn't lost on me. As an accountant, I'd helped dozens of clients navigate their divorces, protecting their assets and minimizing their losses. I knew every trick in the book, every legal loophole, every way to hide money that the courts couldn't touch. But when it came to my own situation, I felt paralyzed. I picked up the phone again and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago but never thought I'd need to use. Law Offices of Patricia Hendricks. This is Jake Thompson. I need to speak with Patricia immediately. It's an emergency. Patricia Hendricks was a family law attorney who specialized in representing men in divorce cases. She was tough, smart, and had a reputation for not backing down from a fight. I'd referred several clients to her over the years, and she'd always gotten good results. Jake, what can I do for you? I need help, Patricia. Lisa filed for divorce, and she's playing dirty. How dirty are we talking? Restraining order based on false accusations, demanding half my business, the works. Her lawyer is Richard Morrison. Patricia's laugh was sharp and humorless. Morrison's a snake, but he's not invincible. Can you be in my office in an hour? I'll be there. I gathered up the papers and headed for the door. As I walked to my car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of the office window. I looked older than my 35 years, with dark circles under my eyes and a day's worth of stubble on my jaw. This wasn't how I'd pictured my life turning out. The drive to Patricia's office gave me time to think. How had things gotten so bad so fast? 3 months ago, Lisa and I had been talking about taking a vacation to Europe. We'd been planning to start trying for kids. Now she was trying to destroy me financially and legally. The answer, I realized, had a name: Bradley Summers. Bradley was Lisa's cousin, a trust fund baby who'd never worked a day in his life. He lived off his inheritance and spent his time giving unsolicited advice to anyone who'd listen. He'd moved to town 6 months ago after his latest get-rich-quick scheme fell apart, and Lisa had insisted he stay in our guest room temporarily. That temporary stay had stretched into months, and Bradley had made himself right at home. He ate our food, used our utilities, and treated me like hired help in my own house. Worse, he'd been filling Lisa's head with poison about our marriage, telling her she deserved better, that I was holding her back, that she should take me for everything I was worth. I should have thrown him out the first week, but Lisa had begged me to let him stay, and I'd caved like I always did. Now I was paying the price for my weakness. Patricia's office was in a sleek downtown building that screamed success. She was waiting for me in the lobby, a petite woman in her 50s with silver hair and steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. "You look like hell, Jake. I feel worse than I look." She led me to her office and poured 2 cups of coffee from an expensive-looking machine in the corner. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." For the next hour, I laid out the whole sordid story. The gradual isolation from my friends, Bradley's arrival and his growing influence over Lisa, the increasing arguments and Lisa's increasingly unreasonable demands. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "This Bradley character," she said when I finished. "Tell me more about him." "What do you want to know?" "Everything. His background, his finances, his relationship with Lisa. If he's behind this, we need to understand his motivations." I thought for a moment. "He comes from money, but I think he's burned through most of it. He's always talking about his next big investment opportunity, but he never seems to have any cash. He's been living off Lisa and me for months." "Interesting. What about his relationship with Lisa? Is there anything inappropriate going on there?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "They're cousins. That doesn't always stop people. I've seen stranger things in 20 years of family law." I tried to picture Lisa and Bradley together in that way, but my mind recoiled from the image. "I don't know. I mean, they spend a lot of time together, but what?" "She's been different since he arrived, more secretive, more critical of me. She used to confide in me about everything, but now she acts like I'm the enemy." Patricia nodded. "Classic alienation pattern. Someone's been working on her, convincing her that you're the problem. The question is whether Bradley's doing it for his own benefit or if he's got other motives." "What kind of other motives?" "Think about it, Jake. If Lisa divorces you and gets half your assets, who benefits? She gets the money, sure, but who's going to be there to help her manage it? Who's going to be her trusted advisor?" The pieces clicked into place. "Bradley." "Exactly. He gets access to your money without having to work for it. It's the perfect scam." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. "So what do we do about it?" "We fight back, but we do it smart, and we do it legally. The first thing we need to do is challenge this restraining order. The accusations are clearly false, and we can prove it. Then we start digging into Bradley's background. If he's running a con, there will be evidence." "How long will all this take?" "Months, maybe longer. Morrison's going to drag this out as long as possible, hoping to bleed you dry. That's his standard strategy." I thought about my business, my clients, my reputation. A drawn-out legal battle could ruin everything I'd worked for. What if we don't fight it? What if I just give her what she wants and walk away? Patricia's expression hardened. That's exactly what they're counting on. They want you to roll over and play victim. But Jake, if you don't fight this, you're not just losing your money, you're letting them get away with fraud and perjury. What happens to the next guy Bradley targets? She was right, of course. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about justice, about standing up to bullies who thought they could destroy people's lives for their own gain. What's the first step? We file a motion to dismiss the restraining order. I'll need character witnesses, people who can testify to your temperament and behavior. Do you have anyone who'd be willing to help? I thought about my isolated social circle, the friends Lisa had driven away. Maybe. I'll have to reach out to some people I haven't talked to in a while. Do it. And Jake, from now on, document everything. Every interaction with Lisa, every communication from her lawyer, every expense related to this case. We're going to need a paper trail. I left Patricia's office feeling more hopeful than I had in days. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had a plan. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be cheap, but at least I was fighting back. The rest of the day was spent making uncomfortable phone calls to old friends, explaining what had happened, and asking for help. Most of them were shocked by Lisa's accusations, and several offered to testify on my behalf. It felt good to reconnect with people I'd lost touch with, even under these circumstances. That evening, I sat in another motel room, working on my laptop and planning my next moves. Patricia was right about documenting everything, so I started a detailed journal of events leading up to the divorce filing. As I wrote, patterns began to emerge that I hadn't noticed before. Lisa's behavior had changed gradually, so slowly that I hadn't seen it happening. The criticism had started small, little comments about my appearance, my work habits, my friends. Over time, it had escalated into full-blown attacks on my character and competence. And it had all started right around the time Bradley moved in. I was beginning to see the scope of their manipulation, and it made me furious. They'd played me like a fiddle, isolating me from my support network and undermining my confidence. Well, the game was over now. It was time to fight back. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for the following Friday, giving us less than a week to prepare our defense. Patricia worked like a woman possessed, gathering statements from my character witnesses and building a case to show that Lisa's accusations were fabricated. I spent the week living out of motel rooms and trying to keep my business running, despite the chaos in my personal life. Janet was a godsend, handling clients and managing the office while I dealt with lawyers and court filings. She never complained, never asked intrusive questions, just did whatever needed to be done. On Wednesday, I got an unexpected call from Tom Bradley, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in over 2 years. "Jake, I heard about what's happening with Lisa. I'm sorry, man." "Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. Listen, there's something you should know. I saw Lisa and that cousin of hers at Marino's last night. They were pretty cozy, if you know what I mean." Marino's was an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place you took someone for a romantic dinner. "What do you mean by cozy?" "Holding hands across the table, whispering to each other, acting like a couple. I thought maybe they were just close family, but it looked like more than that to me. I felt sick to my stomach. Are you sure it was them?" "Positive. I almost came over to say hello, but something about the whole scene felt off. Now I'm glad I didn't." After I hung up, I called Patricia immediately. "That's interesting," she said, when I told her about Tom's observation. "But it's not enough by itself. We need more evidence if we're going to use this angle." "What kind of evidence?" "Photos, credit card receipts, witness statements, anything that establishes a pattern of inappropriate behavior." "I might be able to get some of that. Bradley's been using my credit cards for months. Lisa said it was temporary until he got back on his feet. Get me copies of those statements. If he's been paying for romantic dinners and hotel rooms with your money, we can use that." I spent the rest of the day gathering financial records. What I found made my anger burn even hotter. Bradley had been using my credit cards to fund an extravagant lifestyle. Expensive restaurants, luxury hotels, designer clothes. And many of the charges were for two people, suggesting Lisa had been with him. The most damning evidence was a charge from the Riverside Inn, a boutique hotel about an hour outside the city. The charge was for a weekend stay, dated just 2 weeks ago. I remembered that weekend clearly because Lisa had told me she was visiting her sister in Chicago. Apparently, she'd been much closer to home. Thursday evening, I drove out to the Riverside Inn. It was the kind of place that catered to couples looking for a romantic getaway, secluded, intimate, and discreet. The desk clerk was a young woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "I'm trying to locate some friends of mine," I told her, showing her photos of Lisa and Bradley on my phone. "They stayed here a couple of weeks ago, and I think they left something behind." She glanced at the photos and nodded. "Oh yeah, I remember them. They were here for the weekend. Really sweet couple, very much in love." My heart pounded, but I kept my voice casual. "That's them. Did they happen to mention where they were from?" The guy said they were celebrating their engagement. He was really excited about it, kept talking about their future together. I thanked her and walked back to my car on unsteady legs. Engagement? They were planning to get married? The whole divorce was just a way to get my money so they could start their new life together. I called Patricia from the parking lot. "That's perfect," she said when I told her what I'd learned. "We've got them caught beyond dispute on fraud and perjury. This changes everything." "What happens now?" "Now we go nuclear. I'm filing motions to dismiss the restraining order and to sanction Lisa and her attorney for filing false accusations. We're also going to demand an emergency hearing to freeze all marital assets until we can sort this out. Can we do that?" "With this evidence?" "Absolutely. Morrison's not going to know what hit him." Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I prepared for the hearing. I put on my best suit and tried to project confidence I didn't feel. Patricia met me at the courthouse, carrying a briefcase full of evidence that would hopefully blow Lisa's case apart. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that cast everything in a harsh glare. Lisa was already there with Morrison, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad for corporate law firms. She wouldn't meet my eyes, instead focusing intently on the papers in front of her. Bradley was nowhere to be seen, which struck me as odd. If he was really just Lisa's concerned cousin, wouldn't he be there to support her? Judge Martinez called the hearing to order and asked Morrison to present his case for maintaining the restraining order. Morrison stood and launched into a rehearsed speech about domestic violence and the need to protect vulnerable spouses from abusive partners. "Your Honor, Mrs. Thompson has endured months of emotional and psychological abuse at the hands of her husband. She fears for her safety and needs the protection of this court." He presented no evidence beyond Lisa's written statement, which was full of vague accusations and unspecific claims. According to her statement, I was controlling, manipulative, and prone to violent outbursts. None of it was true, but it sounded convincing on paper. When Morrison finished, Patricia stood to present our defense. She was calm and methodical, laying out the evidence piece by piece, like she was building a wall. "Your Honor, Mr. Thompson is not the abuser in this relationship. He's the victim of an elaborate fraud orchestrated by his wife and her cousin Bradley Summers." She presented the credit card statements, showing Bradley's extravagant spending, the hotel records proving Lisa's deception about her whereabouts, and the witness statement from the desk clerk about their engagement. "Mrs. Thompson has been conducting an inappropriate relationship with her cousin while living in the marital home and spending her husband's money. The divorce filing and restraining order are not legitimate legal actions. They're part of a scheme to defraud Mr. Thompson of his assets." Morrison objected repeatedly, but Patricia had anticipated every argument. She had documentation for every claim, witnesses for every assertion. By the time she finished, Morrison looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Judge Martinez reviewed the evidence carefully before speaking. This is highly irregular. Mrs. Thompson, are you prepared to respond to these allegations? Lisa finally looked up, and I was shocked by what I saw. The confident, defiant woman I'd been married to for 8 years was gone, replaced by someone who looked cornered and desperate. These accusations are false, Your Honor. My relationship with my cousin is purely familial. Then how do you explain the hotel records, the witness testimony about your engagement? Lisa's lawyer whispered something in her ear, but she shook her head. I need time to consult with my attorney. Mrs. Thompson, perjury is a serious crime. If you've made false statements to this court, there will be consequences. I'm dismissing the restraining order immediately and ordering both parties to appear for a full hearing next week. In the meantime, all marital assets are frozen pending investigation. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and just like that, the first battle was over. Lisa gathered her papers and left without looking at me, Morrison trailing behind her like a whipped dog. Patricia was practically glowing with satisfaction. That went even better than I hoped. Morrison's going to have to explain to the state bar why he filed a case based on perjured testimony. What happens next? Next, we go on the offensive. We're going to file for divorce on grounds of adultery and fraud. We're going to demand sanctions against Lisa and Bradley for their scheme, and we're going to make sure you come out of this with everything you deserve. I should have felt victorious, but instead I felt empty. 8 years of marriage, reduced to legal strategies and evidence files. Whatever love Lisa and I had once shared was gone, replaced by lies and manipulation. That evening, I finally went home for the first time in a week. The house felt different, somehow smaller and shabbier than I remembered. Lisa's things were gone, leaving empty spaces on shelves and bare walls where her pictures used to hang. I walked through the rooms, cataloging what was missing and what remained. The expensive jewelry I'd bought her for anniversaries and birthdays, gone. The designer clothes, the luxury handbags, the art pieces she'd insisted we needed, all gone. But she'd left behind the practical things, the everyday items that had no resale value but held memories. In the guest room where Bradley had been staying, I found evidence of hasty packing. Drawers left open, hangers scattered on the floor, a few forgotten items that told a story of sudden departure. On the nightstand was a notepad with scribbled notes in Bradley's handwriting. I picked it up and studied the writing. Most of it was illegible, but I could make out a few phrases. Divorce final, asset split, and new account. At the bottom of the page was a phone number with a name beside it. Cayman Trust Services. My hands started shaking as the implications hit me. They hadn't just been planning to take my money, they'd been planning to hide it offshore where I'd never be able to recover it. The divorce was just the first step in a larger scheme to rob me blind and disappear. I photographed the notepad and immediately called Patricia, even though it was nearly midnight. "Jake, this is huge," she said after I described what I'd found. Cayman Trust Services is a known haven for people trying to hide assets from divorce proceedings. If we can prove they were planning to move your money offshore, we can get them on federal fraud charges. Federal charges? Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud. We're talking serious prison time if they're convicted. I thought about Lisa, the woman I'd once loved enough to marry, facing years in federal prison. Part of me felt sorry for her, but a larger part felt she'd made her choice when she decided to betray me. What do we do? First thing tomorrow, we contact the FBI. This is beyond a simple divorce case now. It's a criminal matter. And Jake, don't touch anything else in that room. It's a crime scene now. I hung up and sat in my empty house, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been built on lies. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new revelations, new pain. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was winning. The FBI took the case seriously. Agent Rebecca Walsh was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in financial crimes. She arrived at my house the next morning with a team of forensic accountants and computer specialists who turned Bradley's former room into a crime scene. "Mr. Thompson, I need you to understand that this investigation could take months or even years to complete, Agent Walsh told me as her team worked. Financial fraud cases are complex, especially when they involve offshore accounts. I understand. I just want justice. Justice is what we're after, but I need you to be patient and let us do our job. Don't try to contact your wife or her cousin. Don't do anything that could compromise the investigation. I watched the FBI team catalog evidence, photograph everything, and carefully bag items that might be relevant to their case. It was surreal, seeing my home treated like a crime scene, but it was also validating. Finally, someone with authority was taking this seriously. The investigation moved quickly once it got started. Within days, Agent Walsh's team had traced financial transactions that painted a clear picture of Bradley and Lisa's scheme. They'd been planning this for months, slowly moving money into accounts Bradley controlled and setting up the offshore trust to hide the assets after the divorce. The sophistication of this operation suggests your wife's cousin has done this before, Agent Walsh told me during one of our meetings. We're looking into his background, and we're finding a pattern of similar schemes in other states. Other victims? At least 3 that we've identified so far. Bradley Summers isn't his real name, by the way. He's actually Bradley Hoffman, and he's got a record going back 15 years. Fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. He's a career criminal. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Lisa had invited a career criminal into our home, given him access to our finances, and helped him plan to rob me blind. How could I have been so blind? What about Lisa? Is she a victim or a participant? Agent Walsh's expression was grim. Based on the evidence we've collected, she's a full participant. The hotel records, the joint planning sessions, the offshore accounts, she knew exactly what she was doing. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings and investigative interviews. Patricia and I worked closely with the FBI to build both the criminal and civil cases. The evidence against Lisa and Bradley was overwhelming, but they'd both hired expensive lawyers and were fighting every step of the way. Meanwhile, I tried to rebuild my life and my business. The scandal had attracted media attention, and several clients had left, concerned about being associated with the controversy. But others had stayed, and new clients had actually sought me out, impressed by how I'd handled the situation. Janet proved invaluable during this period, managing the office and dealing with reporters while I focused on the legal battles. She never complained about the extra work or the chaos that had invaded our normally quiet accounting practice. "You're handling this better than most people would," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed the day's appointments. "I don't feel like I'm handling it well. Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water." "That's normal. You're dealing with betrayal by the person you trusted most. It's going to take time to heal from that." She was right, of course. The emotional toll was harder to deal with than the legal and financial aspects. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, thinking about signs I'd missed, conversations I'd misinterpreted, moments when I should have seen the truth. The worst part was the realization that the woman I'd married probably never existed. The Lisa I'd fallen in love with had been a carefully constructed facade, designed to make me trust her enough to give her access to my life and my money. Every memory was now suspect, every moment of happiness tainted by the knowledge that it had been built on lies. 3 months after the FBI investigation began, Agent Walsh called with news. "We've arrested Bradley Hoffman in the Cayman Islands. He was trying to access the offshore accounts when local authorities picked him up. He's being extradited to face federal charges." "What about Lisa?" "She's agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. She's providing information about other potential victims and helping us trace the money trail." I felt a complex mix of emotions at this news. Relief that the investigation was progressing, anger that Lisa was getting a deal, and a strange sadness that our marriage had come to this. "What kind of sentence is she looking at?" "With cooperation, probably 3 to 5 years. Without it, she'd be facing 15 to 20. 3 to 5 years seemed like nothing compared to the damage she'd done to my life. but I understood the pragmatic reasons for the deal. Her cooperation would help convict Bradley and potentially save other victims from similar schemes. The civil divorce case moved forward parallel to the criminal investigation. With Lisa's cooperation in the criminal case, Morrison had been forced to withdraw from representing her, citing conflicts of interest. Her new lawyer was pushing for a quick settlement, but Patricia and I were in no mood to be generous. "She gets nothing," I told Patricia during one of our strategy sessions. "After what she's done, she deserves nothing." "I understand your anger, Jake, but we need to be practical. If we push too hard, she might withdraw her cooperation from the criminal case." "Let her. The FBI has enough evidence to convict her and Bradley without her help." Patricia studied me carefully. "This isn't just about the money anymore, is it?" She was right. Somewhere along the way, this had become about more than recovering my assets or even seeing justice done. It had become about proving that actions have consequences, that people can't just destroy other people's lives without paying a price. "I want her to understand what she's lost," I said finally. "Not just the money or the comfortable life, but the person who would have done anything for her. She threw away something real for a con man's promises." "Jake, you can't make someone understand that kind of loss if they're not capable of feeling it. Some people just don't have that capacity for genuine emotion." The divorce was finalized 6 months after Lisa first filed her papers. She got nothing. No alimony, no property settlement, no share of my business. The judge, informed about the criminal case, ruled that her fraudulent behavior voided any claim to marital assets. I watched her leave the courthouse that day, looking smaller and older than I remembered. She'd aged years in the months since her arrest, and the confident, manipulative woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who looked broken and defeated. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I couldn't summon the emotion. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Bradley's trial began 8 months after his arrest. I testified about the financial damage he'd caused, the lies he'd told, and the systematic way he'd manipulated Lisa and isolated me from my friends. The prosecution painted a picture of a career criminal who preyed on vulnerable relationships and destroyed families for financial gain. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Bradley was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. At age 42, he'd likely spend the rest of his productive life behind bars. Lisa's sentencing came 2 weeks later. True to the plea agreement, she received 4 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole in 3 years. She'd also been ordered to pay restitution for the money she'd helped steal, though most of it had been recovered through the FBI investigation. I attended her sentencing, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I needed closure, or maybe I just wanted to see the final chapter of our story play out. She looked at me once across the courtroom, and I saw something in her eyes that might have been regret. But it was too little, too late. 2 years have passed since the sentencing, and I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. The business has not only recovered but thrived, as word of my experience dealing with financial fraud has attracted clients who want an accountant who understands the criminal mind. I've reconnected with old friends and made new ones. Tom and I have resumed our friendship, and he's introduced me to a group of people who share my interests in classic cars and outdoor activities. It feels good to have a social life again, to be around people who value honesty and genuine friendship. Janet was promoted to office manager and has become my most trusted advisor, both professionally and personally. She was the one who suggested I start speaking at seminars about financial fraud prevention, sharing my story to help others avoid similar situations. "You've turned a terrible experience into something positive," she told me after my first speaking engagement. "That takes real strength." The speaking engagements have been surprisingly fulfilling. I've met dozens of people who've been victims of financial fraud, and I've been able to help some of them navigate the legal and emotional challenges of recovery. There's something healing about turning pain into purpose. I still live in the same house, though I've remodeled extensively to erase the memories of Lisa and Bradley. The guest room where Bradley stayed is now my home office, and I've converted the basement into a workshop for restoring classic cars. The Mustang I'd been working on when this all started is finally finished, and I drive it on weekends when the weather's nice. Dating has been challenging. It's hard to trust someone new when your last relationship was built on such fundamental deception. I've gone on a few dates, but nothing serious has developed. Maybe that will change with time, or maybe I'm meant to be alone. Either way, I'm content with my life as it is. I received a letter from Lisa last month. She's eligible for parole in 6 months and wanted to apologize for what she'd done. The letter was full of remorse and explanations about how Bradley had manipulated her, how she'd lost herself in his promises of a better life. I read the letter twice, then threw it away. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Lisa made her choices, and I've made mine. The final piece of closure came when Agent Walsh called to tell me that Bradley had been attacked in prison and was in critical condition. Apparently, even career criminals have standards, and they don't appreciate people who prey on families. I thought you should know, she said. He's expected to survive, but he'll likely be in protective custody for the rest of his sentence. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No satisfaction, no sympathy, just a kind of empty indifference. Bradley Hoffman was no longer relevant to my life, and whatever happened to him in prison was between him and the consequences of his choices. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer, watching the sunset and reflecting on how much my life had changed. 2 years ago, I'd been a naive man who thought he had a happy marriage and a secure future. I'd learned the hard way that both security and happiness are fragile things that can be destroyed by people you trust. But I'd also learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I'd survived betrayal, fought back against people who tried to destroy me, and rebuilt my life on my own terms. I'd discovered that I didn't need someone else to complete me or make me happy. I was capable of creating my own contentment. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Patricia, calling to tell me that the state bar had finally concluded its investigation into Morrison's conduct during the case. He's been suspended for 2 years and fined $50,000, she reported with satisfaction. The bar found that he filed motions based on testimony he knew, or should have known, was false. Good. Maybe it will make other lawyers think twice before helping clients commit perjury. Maybe. How are you doing, Jake? Really doing? I considered the question carefully. I'm good, Patricia. Better than good, actually. I'm free. And that was the truth. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was completely free. Free from lies, free from manipulation, free from the exhausting work of trying to make a dysfunctional relationship work. I was free to be myself, to make my own choices, to build the life I wanted rather than the life someone else expected me to want. The sun disappeared behind the trees, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities. I was ready for all of them. I finished my beer and went inside to work on the financial projections for next quarter. The business was growing faster than I'd ever imagined possible, and I needed to start thinking about hiring additional staff. It was a good problem to have. As I worked, I thought about the speaking engagement I had scheduled for next week. I'd be addressing a group of divorce attorneys about recognizing signs of financial fraud in their cases. It was important work, and I was good at it. My story had become a cautionary tale, but also one of resilience and recovery. I'd been knocked down as hard as anyone could be knocked down, but I'd gotten back up. I'd fought back. I'd won. The house was quiet around me, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of loneliness. It was the peaceful quiet of contentment, of a man who'd found his place in the world and was comfortable with who he'd become. I saved my work and closed the laptop. It was time for bed, and tomorrow would be another day in a life I'd built with my own hands, on my own terms, according to my own values. It was a good life, an honest life, a life worth living. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The man looking back at me was older, maybe a little harder around the edges, but also more confident and self-assured. He'd been tested by fire and had emerged stronger. I smiled at my reflection and continued up the stairs. The past was behind me, the future was ahead of me, and the present belonged entirely to me. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The last thing I did before going to sleep was check the security system I'd installed after Lisa and Bradley's arrest. All sensors showed green, all doors and windows were secure. I was safe in my own home, in my own life, in my own skin. Tomorrow I would wake up in a house that was truly mine, go to work at a business I'd built with my own efforts, and continue living a life based on truth rather than lies. It wasn't the life I'd planned when I was younger, but it was a life I could be proud of. And that, I realized as I drifted off to sleep, was worth more than all the money Lisa and Bradley had tried to steal. They'd taken my trust, my naivety, and my willingness to see the best in people, but they'd left me with something more valuable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything, smart enough to learn from my mistakes, and resilient enough to build something better from the ashes of what they'd destroyed. In the end, they'd done me a favor. They'd freed me from a life built on illusions and given me the opportunity to create something real. For that, if nothing else, I was almost grateful.